I was in 5th grade. And I remember a teacher telling me not to take the test because she felt I didn't read fast enough. And my mom, we were newly here from the South, didn't know anything really about the exam schools. I was only interested in it because the student who sat next to me, a white student, I'll never forget her name, Jean Hanna, was going to take it, so I wanted to take it. So I was discouraged from taking it, and my mom didn't know to advocate for me to take it. And to hear our young sister there just a few minutes ago telling us about being equally discouraged, even though she's an A+ student and she's attending Boston Latin Academy, is very disheartening that the same thing is going on today. So I think our teachers are doing both things. Some people are, telling kids, you should be in school, and others are saying, you're not quite ready for it.
This is a follow-up to a very important forum that we had on Saturday, June 11th, where more than 100 people came together to discuss race in BPS. As many folks know, there have been many incidents of racial discrimination and racial bias, and students feeling unsafe at Boston Latin School. We know from our history that this is not unique to Latin School. This is not a new issue. This is something that Black students and Black families have had to deal with since the beginning of public education right here in Boston. And so we wanted to bring people together, young people, students, very intergenerational, to come and discuss issues of race and how we might move forward. I think this group here is speaking to the diversity issue of students in exam schools. The group behind me here is dealing with teacher diversity throughout the district. And then there is a group that is dealing with racial climate in our schools and in central office. There are educators here tonight. We have clergy who have been part of that effort. In fact, the pastor of this church where we are tonight, Reverend Maynard Culpepper, was active in the planning of the town hall. He couldn't be here tonight, but he's opened up his doors to us, and we're grateful for that. There are some students here tonight. There's a school committee member here tonight. There are some school police officers that are here tonight. There are retired educators, activists here tonight. There are parents here as well. So we're happy to hear from all of these voices. We think it's really important that the community come together to address this issue and really come up with some strategies for moving the school department forward. I think this is a very important meeting of folks coming together. These are very serious issues that we're discussing, and very serious issues that were uncovered at Latin School. And we know it's not unique to Latin School, but we believe that if we are to be successful there, that can have a ripple effect throughout the district. And finally, I would say how critically important it is to support our young people. So this is an effort to support the students who have come forward, not just initially, but since then. There have been many families who have come forward to share their experiences, and we want to make sure that their voices are heard and that the issues are being addressed.
Hi, I'm Donna Lashes. I'm a parent, grandparent, and an employee of the Boston Public Schools and a community activist. I'm a member of the Racial Climate Group, and we just met and discussed some of the outcome from the earlier meeting, and we have come up with four different points around racial climate in the schools. And so the first one is to identify the racial climate of each school. Within that school, we're looking to get feedback from the students, the parents, and the teachers. We talked about that the BSAC has this great application for students that they have online that we could possibly use or adapt to be able to use with the students in the schools. Then we talked about creating one and then distributing to parents a similar application to identify any racial issues or concerns that might be happening at their school. We think it's important that the School Site Council is a major structure of the schools, and that there should be on the agenda of the school either monthly or bi-monthly the topic around racial climate in the school. That be an issue that they address. We think that teachers need a PD, be able to have an opportunity to not only get training around it, but to be able to talk about what that climate is like in their school. We want schools to be able to introduce restorative justice and bring in outside partnerships to be able to support them in that effort. And then at an open house, that's another opportunity to seek input and to give information to parents and to seek input from parents around the racial climate of the school. Our second one was around evaluation of principals, and that the overall policy around the minimum of 25% of black teachers being hired in a school and across the district, that be part of a principal's evaluation. And that parents have input on the principal's evaluation, and that principals receive cultural sensitivity and competency training on a long term, and then some supports that will support them being able to not only work with their staff and their families, but also for themselves. The third was around providing trauma-sensitive schools. We have a number of homeless families and students who've been part of domestic violence, and getting staff and families and others to understand what that means in a student's life and what that means for their learning, and being able to provide supports in the school so that there is some ongoing training. People are able to identify it and get supports. We talked about the school doing a needs assessment at the very beginning of the school year to identify students who need those supports. Each school doing that, so then it goes to the central office, and they're able to then provide maybe a crisis support team that will come out and support that school. And then using outside partners like Suffolk University and the DA office, to mention a few, that has extensive work in this area. And then the fourth being on transparency and accountability, ensuring that there are positive behavior management systems in place in schools, and that schools are using restorative justice methods, and the code of conduct also reflects restorative justice practices. That we ensure that the white administration and staff are required to have a PD on white privilege and implicit bias, so that there is a clear understanding of how that impacts students, families, and their learning. And then as part of family engagement, that the climate survey that goes out every year to families, that there be a question on that climate survey that speaks to racial climate and how families feel in regards to that. And then the last bullet point is ensuring that the budget reflects the implementation of this and the student needs. Okay.
Maybe one is that it's funny when we talk about these things and that should be done. I always credit Beam, because we always talk about these things like this the first time, and people have been here before and talked about it, is that we be very specific. If we say training, we got to say who should train. Because one of the things that people do is they find the most non-confrontational, the most unimpactful trainer they can get, and they say, we checked the box, we did it. So we got to think in terms of getting real down in the detail. Who does it? How long is the training? All that kind of stuff, and that's probably for each of those recommendations.
We did speak a little bit to that. We also talked about using the book Courageous Conversations About Race, and so we spoke a little to it, but we definitely did name some partners to support that work inside and outside of the school district. Okay.
Good evening, my name is Janet Williams. I'm a retired Deputy Superintendent for Boston Public Schools and a member of BEAM. And I was a member of the group Teacher Diversity, Recruitment, Retention, and Support in BPS. And we tried not to overlap with the other groups, but couldn't be helped because the work is so important. So we came up with 5 action steps that we hope can be implemented. The first one is the development of alternative programs and pipelines to prepare non-traditional Black and Hispanic candidates to become licensed teachers. Number 2, to provide ongoing and frequent training and professional development and preparation for the MTEL, with a focus on continuous support for teachers for the MTEL until they pass, and waivers and provisional teachers. These are for teachers on waivers and for provisional teachers, that they continue to have that support until they pass the tests. The third one is utilize current and retired teachers as mentors and recruiters. The fourth one, to implement a system to hold HR and principals accountable in the recruitment and retention of a diverse team of teachers that reflect the student population in the district. And number 5, implement a system of exit interviews and analyze the data from Black and Hispanic teachers to identify the problems which are leading to their exit. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Did your group discuss the role of the personnel subcommittee in the hiring of teachers? Did that come up?
No, we didn't discuss, at the school level, because we felt that HR was the issue. And so we wanted to make sure that that department is held accountable for recruiting teachers, or having them come into the system first before those names of those teachers are actually sent out to the principals. And so that's why we included HR and the principals, so that they have a part in that whole process.
And one, just connecting the dots that I thought was really important. The first group talked about that principals should be evaluated on how diverse their teaching staff was. So I think that's a good connection for your group.
Right. Yes.
I would also add that they continue the work that they're doing with the Alana group. So as they hire teachers of color or staff of color, that there's a support system for them, and that they get to know the neighborhoods that they're going to be working in. And Sarah Daly does some of that work, and I have been a part of that, and I think it's an important effort that also should continue with this, because it's about retaining those staff members that you get.
And I think in our group, we felt that that's HR's responsibility initially, before it even gets to the school level, is that what is your process for recruiting a diverse group of teachers? And so if it's Alana or it's any other organization that sits at the university level or anywhere else, is that it comes back to HR first, because that's where all the paperwork gets shuffled to first. And so we want to make sure that HR is being held accountable for what they're supposed to be doing.
So then what you're saying is that then what you should place in there, that HR have a specific policy in place in order to be able to make sure that these teachers somehow stay within the system.
Exactly. And that's part of HR's responsibility, is recruitment and retention, is that they make sure that all of those pieces are put in place, so that if there's any issues that come up, is that they're addressed. So that's why we said to put a system in place to hold HR accountable for what they're supposed to be doing. Yes.
Do you consider timelines? A lot of times, excuse me, people hire early, so teachers don't even get an opportunity to apply.
Right.
And it's because they've got it internally.
That's right. So again, I think that piece, that HR piece, is really huge, because it would, also include what are the timelines, and so when do you go out to recruit, and so that those people, and that's why I think the principals were added to that. So it's HR and principals, so that they know when they need to hire and who they want to get. If you want to get the best teachers, you have to do it in a timely manner. And so having the principals at the table helps that, to push that. And so in terms of whatever the policy is that we have those people at the table. So we will make sure that that gets included. Yes.
So one of the recommendations that I'm particularly interested in, it has to do with, you mentioned using retired teachers as mentors and recruiters. Could you all talk a little bit more about the mentor piece? That clicks for me. I think certainly we've seen some of that work, but relative to using or asking retired teachers to support the recruitment effort, is there any idea, or did the group have an opportunity to talk about how teachers could be engaged, and retired teachers could be engaged in the process?
We didn't go in depth in that, yeah. But we just felt that those are, when we talk about recruiting, is what are the attributes that teachers should have aside from the requirements. What are the attributes? And teachers that have taught in the system for years would know. So it might not be actually going out recruiting, but what are the pieces, what are the characteristics that we should be looking for when we go out to recruit these teachers? And so we didn't go too deeply into that, but that would be one of the things because they have that expertise already.
Absolutely. I actually think that's one that for me resonated, and I think certainly to the extent that teachers, perhaps retired teachers or even current teachers, but certainly retired educators, could be particularly helpful in actual recruiting. Right. And particularly when we're talking about Black and Latino educators, for young people or for people who may be interested in getting into teaching, for them to be able to see folks who've actually done it and actually exchange with them as they're going through the recruitment process, I think could be particularly powerful.
Yes, because I have utilized current and retired teachers, so I think that's both, to have both of those groups in. Yes.
So I think all of that is really helpful and really connects to a lot of the work that many of the groups like Beam are doing. So thank you for that. I would add, and again, I know many of the groups are already doing this kind of work, but the role of the Office of Equity and making sure that the staff at our schools is diverse. So I don't want to lose that. And then two, I know you talked about provisionals and teachers getting support through MTEL if they're on a waiver. I would also argue that provisional teachers who have scored proficient on their evaluation should receive reasonable assurance letters during the hiring process so that they can be retained, as opposed to going back in the pool again and then just, okay, wonderful. So you guys did talk about that. Thank you very much.
My name is Barbara Fields. I'm a member of Beam and an auntie of a lot of students who are still within Boston Public Schools. I am a member of the Diversity and Recruitment of Students in the Exam Schools, and I'm going to talk about the 5 recommendations that we culled from the June 11th meeting. Ours are pretty much based in looking at where some of the gaps are. So our 5 recommendations have to do with 5 gaps. The first gap is the gap in parent involvement. And our first recommendation is that we find mechanisms to inform the community, parents and students, about the exam schools. And how to access them and how to engage them in the process. The second gap that we looked at is the preparation gap. And so our recommendation is that we must prepare all students by providing a rigorous curriculum, teaching to all students beginning in the early grades. And in doing that, there is an achievement gap policy that is coming out of the school committee right now. And we feel that we need to utilize and implement that policy to address the issues around the gap so that our children are as prepared as any children anywhere else in being able to get into the exam schools. The third is a professional development gap. And that is that we would like to make sure that we provide professional development for teachers and staff that is addressing cultural competency and knowledge of the current situation with students, trauma, any of the other situations that children are dealing with while they're learning at the same time, and that professional development should be informed by our students, by our young people, because they are dealing with learning, engaging in instruction on a daily basis. And that would be helpful for teachers and staff to know. The next gap is a policy gap, and that has to do with revising the admission policy in a way that it becomes truly, the admissions become truly reflective of our city, and that this can be done in a number of ways. And we're aware that there is a letter that went to the superintendent of schools and the president of the school committee that outlines some of the ways in which that policy could be changed. And some of those were cited at, by members at the town hall meeting, which dealt with whether or not we wanted to looking at neighborhoods, looking at schools, looking at how many students within Boston Public Schools are actually getting into the exam schools, and the things that we need to do to make sure that it's more reflective of our city. And the last gap is a support gap, and that has to do with retention. When our young people are in the exam schools, we want to make sure that we have more focused support for our 7th and 8th graders when they enter the exam schools, so that our students get the support and the help that they need to make sure that they are retained in the exam schools. And that also has to do with making sure that our 6th graders are equally prepared, to access the exam schools in the 7th grade. And so those were the 5 recommendations that we came up with out of that June 11th meeting. Okay.
The students who are in the advanced work class, like how many students that are in the advanced work class were for the 4th grade and 5th grade, how many of them are able to go into the exam school?
I don't have the numbers. I don't know if anyone else in the room does, but I think it's not as many as we would think that are accessing the exam schools. I think that some of that has to do with the fact of our first recommendation, parents and students being aware, of the exam school, that's a viable option, and they take that IC test and they prepare for it. And it also goes to the point we raised about students within Boston Public Schools not necessarily being in the majority of students who are accessing exam schools, and our AWC programs are within Boston Public Schools. And then looking at that program in terms of the racial breakdown of the students who are in that program. So I think it all kind of goes back to preparation, and I think you're probably mentioning that in terms of some kids do get that preparation through AWC. But I think what we're saying is that it should not start or be based on AWC, that the curriculum throughout the district should be rigorous, so that no matter what school, what program you're in, you still are prepared to go into not AWC, but the exam schools.
I think also being able to track data on students, whether they're being retained, and if they're not staying in the exam, where are they going, and doing an exit survey with them of why they have exited the exams.
Right. I think that's a great recommendation.
My question has to do with teacher involvement as far as making suggestions to the students in their classroom, whether or not if they think that they are prepared to actually attend these exam schools. Because I know that's what happened to me. That's how I got introduced to going to Boston Tech, which changed to John D. O'Brien. So I don't know if that's still going on.
I think from what we're hearing, especially from a student member of our group, she talked about being discouraged from going into the exam schools, from taking the test. And so I think it sort of cuts both ways. And part of the recommendation was to work with our teachers to do some professional development with them, so that they are in fact encouraging our young people, not only preparing them, but encouraging them to also access the exam schools, because you can imagine how long ago I was in 5th grade. And I remember a teacher telling me not to take the test because she felt I didn't read fast enough. And my mom, we were newly here from the South, didn't know anything really about the exam schools. I was only interested in it because the student who sat next to me, a white student, I'll never forget her name, Jean Hanna, was going to take it, so I wanted to take it. So I was discouraged from taking it, and my mom didn't know to advocate for me to take it. And to hear our young sister there just a few minutes ago telling us about being equally discouraged, even though she's an A+ student and she's attending Boston Latin Academy, is very disheartening that the same thing is going on today. So I think our teachers are doing both things. Some people are, telling kids, you should be in school, and others are saying, you're not quite ready for it. So I think we need to address what you're saying through working with our staff.
Could you talk a little bit more about the policy or the access gap that you all discussed as a group? Specifically, you mentioned some ideas that were floated relative to ways in which we could potentially change the admissions process to be more inclusive. You mentioned, you made reference to neighborhoods, you made reference to BPS students, perhaps having some sort of preference. Could you talk just a little bit more about that?
There's a member of our group who could probably talk more explicitly about it, but certainly what we have been hearing within the district was that you cannot use race as a factor because of some of the court rulings, Supreme Court rulings, when in fact that's not necessarily the case, because if you deal with the being narrowly tailored, then in fact you can use race. And so I believe what the district and other institutions have done is to back away from looking at it, at all based on race. And I think there was a recent court decision that also speaks to the value of diversity in schools. And so I know that letter that went forth that was signed by members of different organizations within our community has laid out for the district some of those areas that we could look at. And I don't know if you might want to add some of them for me, because I can't think of them offhand, but there's certainly other ways in which we could address this.
In the 20 years since the admissions policies have been challenged at Latin and at our exam schools, our U.S. Supreme Court, U.S. Departments of Justice and Education have only done more to make clear how you can promote racial diversity and reduce racial isolation at our schools. And even last week, the U.S. Supreme Court reaffirmed that in the University of Texas. We have the same options open to us here. In fact, the court lays out a roadmap for ways that don't even raise the specter of strict scrutiny that proved so hard for our prior integration plans to pass. We can consider things like whether a student attends a Boston public school when they're applying for exam school admission. We can consider their neighborhood. We can consider their zip code. If all of those things work to promote the racial diversity of the school. We can look more holistically at a student, understanding not only just their test score and their GPA, but also their extracurriculars. Factors about language, about disability, about what they face, what they carry, and what unique perspectives they would bring to the classroom and to the cultural environment of an exam school, whatever they may be, right? Those are holistic factors that we are well within the constitutional balance to consider. In fact, those are only been reinforced by our U.S. Supreme Court right now.
I would also add that I like the fact that you all talked about improving the curriculum for all, because I think as some of us as parents have always seen the advanced work class as being a dual system within the Boston Public Schools that leads directly to the exam school, so that students who aren't in the advanced work class don't have the same options of getting in to Boston Latin Academy, or John D. O'Brien. And so I'm glad that you all have really talked about how you ensure that the curriculum will support the movement of students from all schools, not or from all programs, opposed to one particular program into the exam schools.
Thank you.
We gotta understand how media, how all these mediums of exchange is creating implicit bias. It's creating anxiety in people who are coming into this community to say they want to make a difference, but they don't understand. What we got to understand is that they also want to go back home.